Hey y'all, welcome back. We've got Heff, that's me, and the Cyber Funky Bunch. MC Forrest with the color commentary on the week's cyber news. We mix in a little comedy, a little Schadenfreude, and of course the top cyber stories from the past week. Now, the PHP GIT Breach is in the news. We're also going to talk about the Ubiquiti, and it's a lot bigger than we thought. And of course, we find out if Brian Krebs is behind the Exchange server breach, all on today's episode. Hey, DJ Hunter, spin those turntables. All right, so Forrest, I was blown away Sunday night. This tweet came across my wire. It was from the U.S. Strategic Command, Omaha, Nebraska. Did you happen to see it?
Yeah. There was a lot of speculation happening around that sent people off on some wild goose chases, man.
My gosh. So the story goes the base command's Twitter manager, he was in this telework status and he got up from his computer, momentarily left his Twitter the account open, and his young child, very young child, took advantage of the situation and tweeted out some crazy stuff. We'll put it up here on the screen. And the Twitter universe, Forrest, went nuts. People thought it was nuclear launch codes. They just, speculation was pretty insane. But unfortunately, the command put out a rebuttal saying, hey, no, nothing to worry about, nothing to see here, folks. Move along, move along.
Yeah. There were some nutty directions that it was going. I saw some QAnon stuff popping up. I saw, people speculating that this was a password from a password manager or something. I mean, all very plausible, and equally plausible is a toddler smashing on your keyboard. Because, yeah.
And we hope that that's the story. You know, obviously having a plausible cover story is also very smart too. So if they were breached or hacked, you hope that that's not the case because of what Stratcom has and access to all that nuclear stuff. So let's move on to the next story for us, because I think this is so important. You know, our first two stories are about the humans, security awareness, you know, locking down your computer screen. And this next one is the guy, the glitter bomb dude. Have you ever seen his videos?
Oh yeah, they're an absolute riot. Love what he does.
The porch pirates. See, this is Mark Rober. He's the guy that sends out the videos about the porch pirates, and he has these glitter bombs, and you know, he tracks people that steals packages. Well, he just put out a video this past week showing. Forrest, this video was a doozy. Talking about, you know, these phone scammers. These guys are such scumbags, these phone scammers, and Mark Rober decided to get back at them. And what's amazing about the video that Mark put out, and we'll include the link here, is the depth of the scam that they do for us. I was just in shock for 23 minutes how deep this scam goes.
Yeah, definitely international efforts, massive network of criminal enterprise. It's pretty scummy what they do. They're definitely taking advantage of people that are in some pretty dire straits sometimes, and it's just super unfortunate. You know, when it comes to these like scam phone calls or even phishing emails, you know, kind of tying it back to the whole cybersecurity on the whole, be wary of anything that's like very urgent and is insisting on some kind of call to action. Like, I need you to do something. You know, you have these scam calls like, oh, so-and-so is in jail and you need to give them $10,000 for bail. And it's like, you know, whoa, that's very stressful. You know, just stop, take a second, and try and verify that out of band. You know, if you can get independent confirmation, then maybe act on it.
Well, Mark's video is pretty amazing. It shows you how the scammers trick the elderly into sending money. They use AnyDesk software, and he shows in his video how the elderly have to package up the money. You know, they slip the dollar bills, not dollar bills, $100 bills into a book. He shows where the money gets sent. He shows how they use Airbnbs for the money drop. He also talks about the money mules, how much they get paid, how much their supervisors get paid. And of course, the best part is he actually gets one of them to pick up one of those glitter bomb videos as it goes off and has the person arrested. So if you get a chance, folks, get elderly, especially the elderly population, to see this video, make them aware of it, what these people are doing, so they don't get taken for it. And it's just a tragedy all around how bad these scammers work. So good video, great video, excellent video. Definitely put that in your inventory. All right, so this is the best part of the show, the most prominent data breaches in the news from the past week. And we try to select these based on the lessons learned and the uniqueness of some of these breaches. So the first one we're going to talk about is the PHP, the GIT Server Breach. And what hackers were able to do was basically take PHP source code and breach an internal Git server and backdoor this source code. This story, Forrest, is pretty unreal.
Yeah, it's pretty scary that it's hard to say how deep this goes, but there's some implications that have been hinted at in the stuff that was inserted that's very disturbing.
Yeah, and these hackers, what they were able to do is they were able to compromise the server that distributes the PHP programming language. And then on top of all that, they were able to backdoor and add a backdoor for the source code. So this basically makes websites vulnerable. And beyond all this, there were 2 updates that were pushed out. If you run a PHP-powered website and you allow visitors with no authorization to execute the code, that's a bad thing. There's a lot of details behind this because the word Zerodium keeps coming up in the HTTP header. Let's talk about that for a minute, Forrest.
Yeah. So there was a comment in the Git commit saying that it was sold to Zerodium mid 2017, which is very interesting of them to include. One, can it be trusted?
Right.
First of all, who knows if that's even legit or not? They may just be blowing smoke. If they are, then that shows a very clear intent to burn this vulnerability in a manner so that it can no longer be used. Maybe they did sell this vulnerability back then, and they decided, maybe 4 years of exploitation is enough, and we just need to close this up. Zerodium, according to their pay scale, would have given out probably about $250,000 for a vulnerability of this type. So, yeah, definitely not a small amount.
Yeah, and we should clarify for the audience, if you're not familiar with Zerodium, they're a broker, and they buy exploits from researchers. They sell them to all sorts of clients, including government agencies, and those exploits are used for investigations and other purposes. And the good news is the CEO of Zerodium on Twitter came out and said, hey, we got nothing to do with this. I don't know why we're being referenced in here, but we are not involved. And we don't exactly know a lot of the details how this happened. We do understand that the commits involved in this were attributed to 2 very well-known PHP developers. And these guys, again, we're waiting to understand how and where all of this got executed. But it's interesting stuff to understand from a developer perspective. If your Git server gets compromised, there's a huge amount of lessons learned here. Okay, let's talk about Hobby Lobby. Forrest, Hobby Lobby in the news, a security researcher by the name of Boogeyman. Anytime the Boogeyman comes and says something to you, you should listen to the Boogeyman. And this guy, he went to Hobby Lobby and he said, hey, I found these vulnerabilities, a misconfigured cloud. How many times, Forrest, have we seen this? Is it getting old yet?
Lather, rinse, repeat. It's every day. It's just a cycle, never ending.
My gosh, exposed 138 gigabytes of customer payment and payment information, customer information, 300,000 customers. And here's the way, folks, if you want to know how to find out if you're involved in this breach, all I did, Forrest, I went out to the trunk of my car and I just found every Hobby Lobby receipt that my wife has ever done from the past year. And I knew that we're going to be caught up in this breach. That's how we did it, man.
Metric. pretty good.
Yeah, thank you. That's the best way to do it. So Boogeyman finds this stuff. The issue's been resolved. Thankfully, Hobby Lobby has resolved it. But they're just there's no slack here, folks. I mean, if you have open AWS buckets, you got to get this stuff fixed. You can't keep having this same story all the time. All these companies with these misconfigured cloud stuff. It's gotta stop. And Forrest, the thing about these misconfigured cloud buckets is a lot of these people set these things up and they just leave the default configurations in place.
Yeah. I think that AWS's identity and access management is woefully underutilized. They've definitely put together some tools that make it pretty apparent what you should be doing to keep these things secure, and they just aren't being done. I don't know if it's they're moving quickly, iterating on an idea, going from dev to production super quickly. But in my opinion, I think that even your dev systems should have the same security standards that production does.
Absolutely.
It just makes sense that you're keeping it as close in line to what the end result is going to be, so that you don't forget these kind of things and potentially shoot yourself in the foot down the road.
So, and especially now, organizations, they can scale these up and scale them down so quickly, and that's where the problems come into play as well. So, again, Hobby Lobby, it's out there, folks. It's something you need to be aware of. It's good lessons learned, especially if you have family that loves to shop at Hobby Lobby. Make sure they're aware of it. So, let's switch gears and talk about the SolarWinds Circus. Do you like that circus? It comes to town just about every day in the news.
Yep. Every couple of weeks or so, we get treated to another round of pure entertainment.
And it's entertainment because nobody's doing anything about it. You don't really hear about any sort of retribution to the threat actors that were involved. There's been no retaliative measures from the United States that has been announced, at least, right? So we have a lot of data points to work on. And this past week in the news, the AP Wire picked up on a story about the head of DHS, and a lot of their employees' emails were absolutely caught up and hacked, apparently, right? So no word right now on the dark web what the value of the hacking was. We don't know what details were released in any of those emails. We don't know if they're being sold on the dark web or not. But Forrest, the damage and the symbolism, I feel like like a Captain America reference here, man. It's like if your government is having trouble with their own cybersecurity, how do you expect them to kind of protect and help lead the endeavor of protecting our country from all these cyber attacks?
Yeah. It's it definitely has some very psyop levels of feel to it. And as far as retaliation goes, I mean, what that should be. I mean, there's a lot of hubbub in the InfoSec community about this. I think malware tech, what's his name? Marcus Hutchins had a really good video talking about this, where you get some people that are like, oh, there should be kinetic retaliation, and it's like, attribution is very difficult. I don't know that I would be comfortable, demanding that we bomb somebody over a cyber attack. The escalation is a little scary in that regard.
Yeah. And both of these breaches, the SolarWinds, we're in the era of the mega hack, right? So both of these breaches, the SolarWinds breach, the Excellion breach, the Exchange Server breach, the O365 breach, and all these other ones that have been happening, all of them not being detected by our government, all of them detected by private companies. And then you hear these stories, for us, like the FAA comes out and they says, we were actually hampered. We have all this outdated technology. It took us weeks just to identify how many servers had SolarWinds running. That's the kind of stuff when you talk about the CIS, the critical, security controls, having an inventory of what's in your environment, having an inventory of not just the hardware and software and the devices, but all of that stuff. None of that seems to be happening in a lot of these cases that we're finding out of the SolarWinds. So a lot of information to process. The circus will continue. The SolarWinds circus will continue. But we do have two more breaches we need to very quickly talk about here. We got to talk about the SITA breach, aviation breach. This one, Forrest, it seemed like it got pushed under the radar, that nobody really knew about it. It happened back February 24th, yet we didn't really know about it for a couple weeks, and then very slowly each of the airlines started putting out some information about, hey, some passengers were affected, your frequent flyer data. And I'm thinking to myself, my frequent flyer data, this stuff's really important data. And it seems like these airlines are just pushing it on the radar. SITA, by the way, they handle a lot of IT services. Like 90% of the airlines use SITA for handling a lot of their IT services. So to hear this and to not feel like it's a big deal, it upset me a little bit, Forrest.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I think something really shocking is going to have to happen with some of some of the data that's leaked from these breaches before it really gets treated with the gravity that I think it deserves. Until then, it's all kind of this. There's the potential for abuse with it, and until somebody really starts operationalizing it, I think there's going to be kind of this whimsical, not really taking it very seriously from these companies and also from governments.
Yeah. All right, we got to talk about Shell as well. Shell caught up in the Excellion breach. They just put out a little announcement about it. There's not much data to know about here. Shell did not release a lot of information about it. We do know that none of their core IT systems have been compromised, and that's about the extent of it. We do know that Excellion was involved in it. The breach was connected back to Excellion. Just tragic all around how many companies were caught up in these era of the mega hacks. So
yeah, I think there was a recent update that I saw as of the 29th. The ransomware group Clop actually published some screenshots of visas and passports and company reports and things of that nature. Some of the reporters had reached out to Shell for confirmation, but it's been radio silence. So I think they're trying to keep things very tight. Mum's the word, and who knows what further developments will happen from this.
all right, it's time for our top stories. This is a fun segment. This is where we try to really pick what was the most impactful stories of the past week or so that really just knocks our socks off. And the big one for us just came out, this whistleblower going to the reporter Brian Krebs. If you're not familiar with Krebs on Security, fantastic website. We use it a lot for reference and trying to understand some things that are happening out there. But Brian Krebs actually had a whistleblower come from Ubiquiti, and they said, hey, Brian, I've got this story you got to hear about, and I'm going to be a whistleblower. I'm going to tell you some crazy stuff that it went down. This breach is a lot bigger than people realize.
Yeah. I think this definitely puts the quit back in Ubiquiti. It's
good. That's good, man. That's a good play on words.
It's brutal, man. Like reading through this, I was like, wow, this is a disaster piece.
No, I think it's a lot bigger than a disaster. To hide this kind of stuff, folks, is wrong. If a breach happens, trying to protect your stock price is the wrong thing to have. So, yeah, I mean, it's important, obviously, but really, if the breach is much bigger than what's expected, the people need to know about it, especially when you're talking about how many different things behind the scenes are connected back to their equipment, their hardware. So this researcher, Krebs called him Adam. That was his code name. He spoke on the condition of anonymity. I can't pronounce the word for it.
Anonymity. I'm an anemone.
I'm an anemone, right, in the ocean. Dory, Finding Dory. All right, so this researcher, he helped the company Ubiquiti respond, and it was a 2-month response, and he said, I have some concerns, and I'm going to raise it with your whistleblower hotline at Ubiquiti, and they didn't seem to care. And then he said, I'm going to go to the European Data Protection Authorities, I'm going to report this, and then I'm going to go to the news media, specifically Brian Krebs, and he basically said, this is what's happening, which, Forrest, the part of the whistleblowing, and we're going to include the link on here, but the part of the whistleblowing that got me was when Ubiquiti said there was a third party involved.
Oh, yeah. So the third party apparently was just AWS. That was their hosting.
Right.
And the way that it was worded was so mealy-mouthed, weasel-wordy. It wasn't AWS that was breached. It was just Ubiquiti's that just shot themselves in the foot. So, I mean, the extent of the compromise is pretty crazy. Let me just run down the list here.
Yeah, please do, Forrest, because I don't think the audience knows how bad this is.
It is gross. Okay, so first off, attackers had admin access to all of their AWS servers. It impacted their single sign-on, remote access, full source code, and all their signing keys. They had root admin access to all of their AWS accounts, S3 buckets, all their logs, their databases, and user credentials. So basically just meaning that an attacker could access any Ubiquiti device in the world without them. They noticed that several unauthorized VMs were spun up. They didn't specify what those VMs were doing. They had left behind a backdoor. Ubiquiti then found that as part of the incident response. They closed that backdoor, and attackers responded with a 50 Bitcoin ransom to keep quiet about the breach. So they said, give us 50 Bitcoin and we won't say anything. And then Ubiquiti found a second backdoor. And what was really stunning about this was, even though Ubiquiti knew that all of the user credentials were compromised, they didn't they didn't just wipe and force everybody to create new credentials. They waited until the user's next sign-on to have them rotate the credentials.
Brilliant,
so
brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, a window where that compromise happened until the next sign-in, depending on user response. That's a pretty wide window for somebody to then potentially go in and have at your network. That's absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, and the people that are involved in this that use their product line, I mean, they should be up in arms. You should be saying, you know what? The next chance I get to get off of their equipment, I'm going to do it. And I'm tired of, if you're going to lie to me about a breach and how bad it was, then you don't deserve my trust. You don't deserve my business, and I'm going to move on. So, and there's a lot of options out there. We don't need Ubiquiti in our lives. We want them in our lives, but we don't need them in our lives. So these businesses got to straighten up.
Yeah. It's I really hope that they have learned their lesson from this, and that we see some kind of reform, because honestly, that level of lack of disclosure and misdirection just leaves a terrible taste in my mouth. And I think it's a gross abuse of their customer base.
Yeah, gross abuse of trust. Okay, Forrest, let's switch gears for a moment and let's talk about the state of the attack landscape. Let's talk about that for a moment, because things have changed, and I don't know if we really covered a lot about ransomware 2.0 or any of those details. So let's make sure the audience understands. Ransomware 2.0, it's what we're calling the latest types of attack threats and vectors that the threat actors are using. Basically, what you see is the threat actor comes in, they steal your data, but before they do that, they encrypt your data, and by doing so, then they can charge a ransom and they can get you to pay up. So victims then are put in this crazy situation where not only did you breach me and you took my data, but then you encrypted my data, and now I got to pay you to get it back? So that's ransomware 2.0. It's making the news because a report was put out by F-Secure. F-Secure highlighted some of the bad guys are involved. We're going to show you up on the screen some of these players, some of these ransomware families. Again, these families are not just stealing the data, but they're threatening to leak it. So take a look at this chart for a moment. You see the ransomware players in bold. They were the ones that were observed extorting companies going as far back as 2018. We know that May's ransom group was the first to do this this ransomware 2.0, where they not just steal your data, they encrypt it, and they ask for a ransom back. But what's interesting about this chart, folks, is by the end of 2020, you start to see 15 different ransomware families. And some of the older ransomware families now are being updated and they're now demonstrating this data exfiltration and encryption capabilities. So this stuff is not going away, and it's only going to get bigger and bigger. And there's a lot more trends going on in the attack landscape.
Yeah.
Forrest, thoughts?
Yeah, the whole double dip extortion thing is, yeah, I mean, it's been growing over the last year and a half, especially. But yeah, the whole idea that about 40% of all ransomware is now doing this is pretty interesting. I thought some of the tactics that they were using were pretty creative. So there was one where anytime that the ransom talks had kind of stalled as far as negotiating payment, they would then start launching DDoS attacks against them.
Right.
Just
right.
as a, hey, you can't ignore this kind of thing. Like you need to get back to us. Another one that they mentioned in the report was print bombing, which I thought was sickly genius. It reminded me kind of that scene from Back to the Future Part 2 where, you're fired, read my facts. Just mass sending these ransom notes to every printer in the company, I thought was a great psyop. There's a lot of use of DNS servers for command and control, just underscoring the importance of monitoring those DNS requests. I thought some of the stats that they have in there were pretty cool too. They did a really good rundown, kind of the overall state of ransomware, if you will. And oddly enough, the top 3 countries that they cited as sources. Now that's attribution is hard, but the originating IPs. Number 1 was China with 911 million. Number 2 is US with 808 million, which I thought was very interesting. That there's a very shallow gap between those two. And then the third was Ireland with about 455 million attacks originating from there. So,
which is shocking.
Pretty interesting stuff.
Which is shocking,
and
yeah.
Then the top 3 services being targeted were SSH, SMB, and Telnet, which I thought was really interesting. That is Telnet really that heavily used anymore that it deserves to be a top 3 target, or is it just they go for what's easy? I don't know.
Oldie but goodie, low hanging fruit. You know. Some of the things that they also highlighted in the report caught my attention, and we shared this internally with our team. But attackers obviously using Excel formulas, and the clear takeaway here is the default features that cannot be blocked. So obfuscation of the malicious code is much easier using Excel as a threat vector. A couple other items too, Outlook being the most popular brand that was spoofed in phishing emails. They also, in the report, mentioned Facebook and Office 365 being used quite heavily for phishing. Again, no surprise there. They're very popular companies, and a lot of people have those accounts. So if I'm a bad guy and I'm going to make some phishing emails, that's what I'm going to use. 3/4 of all domains used to host phishing pages are web hosting services. That no surprise there, but it's good to see it in print because a lot of people tend to overlook that, Forrest.
Yeah, and it definitely makes things a little bit more difficult when you're trying to figure out, is this legitimate or not? You can't really keep track of all these easy to spin up web hosting services. And so that's one of the reasons that they leverage it is because it's very actionable and very quick turnaround.
Yeah, and the other thing too is the report talked about malware infection. The primary threat vector came from email accounts and spreading malware via, spear phishing. Again, no surprise there if you followed our channel. And then finally, 61% of vulnerabilities that were found in corporate networks. And Forrest, this number, I know, facepalm, right? I mean, this is the one you go, oh, you got to be kidding me, man. 61% of vulnerabilities found in corporate networks were disclosed on or before 2016. Folks, we're talking vulnerabilities more than 5 years old, and people still aren't patching it. Just go nuts.
Yeah. Talk about far past the expiration date, man. It's just it's painful to see these super old CVEs that have been patched for years still getting leveraged for attacks. It hurts. It
It does,
hurts.
man. It does. It gives you headaches every night, folks, and there's nothing we can do about it except notify our clients, for example, and notify people in the audience to make sure that you're aware of some of these stats. So, what's helpful about attack landscapes and understanding it and revisiting these statistics is it helps us maintain our focus. So, it's always good to look at these kind of reports that come out and study them and understand them. So, all right, we got to talk about something new. Not really. Something old, yeah. Exchange, Forrest. Ah, my God, we're
The
still
gift
talking
that
about
keeps on
this.
giving, man.
Yeah,
It's been a rough like month and a half. I don't even know how long at this point, man.
I don't know,
Yeah.
but we got to tell the folks a story, and you're gonna have to follow along with my story here because it's a wild roller coaster ride on this story, and I'll do my best to try to explain it to you as simple as possible. So, a group called Shadow Server, they're a foundation. They track a lot of the attacks related back to Exchange. They came out and they put out a big report. I want to say it was like March 16th, maybe. Was that the date for us? I'm trying to remember. 16th through the 23rd. I think that was the date. They basically said over 1 million events. Shadow Server has been tracking wave after wave of attacks, over 1 million events. Fast forward to March 25th, and they put out some numbers saying, hey, we found about 101,000 distinct host names. That's important. Distinct host names. They found 101,000. And the host names are important because we're going to tell you a crazy story here about a very unique host that was caught up in this. Now, what the group does, Shadow Server, is they spend a lot of their time and energy scanning. They do all sorts of active internet scans. They do all sort of honeypots to try to gather up this data. What's fascinating, and where this story starts to take a weird turn, is they found a backdoor. And not just any backdoor. They found this backdoor called Draco, Baby Draco. And I don't think, Forrest, we've ever talked about Baby Draco before.
I don't believe so. Yeah, these web shells are pretty crazy.
Yeah, so what Shadow Server was able to do, they found 21,000 Exchange servers that had Baby Draco in it. And when you start to dive into the host names that Baby Draco is talking back to and communicating with, one of them that came up was this Brian Krebs thing. And that's where the story gets a little crazy, right, Forrest?
Yeah, yeah. This definitely is not Krebs' first rodeo. We can get more into that in a minute.
Yeah. So up on the screen right now, you should see some of this one of our reports. This came from Alien Vault, and it basically shows how the host name is tied back to Brian Krebs. It's a purple arrow with a red underline on it, and obviously this is not a safe domain, so please don't go to this domain. But the motivations behind cyber criminals using something like Brian Krebs' name, if you followed Brian Krebs or you do any of his stories, he targets and goes after and tries to expose a lot of these card shops. He's always continually being attacked. There's some really funny stories about how the threat actors have used his name in memes. Weren't you telling me? I know they sent flowers to his house. I saw that post one time a long time ago.
Even better. I think it was like back in 2014 or so, somewhere around there. I think it was a carding group tried to send him heroin, and
What?
he was actually on the forum watching their posts, crowdfunding this effort to buy heroin off of a darknet market and have it mailed to him. So he was able to inform the police before it ever got to him. What I thought was interesting about that was they pulled together 2 Bitcoin, which nowadays that's $100,000. That's some expensive drug deal there. But he's been swatted. I mean, he's definitely no stranger to all of this, and I think this latest round is pretty interesting. I mean, he's actually engaged in some doxing behavior himself. One was against a couple security researchers that were criticizing Spam House. Another one was a guy that was leaving him a bad book review, and so he went around and doxed him. Ended up being some kind of cyber criminal, so obviously he's going to be biased in that regard. But yeah, just some real interesting drama surrounding this guy.
So the domain that the backdoor is being communicating with is this Brian.Krebs. You can read a lot more of it on Brian's website, Krebs on Security. It's a fascinating story. He did not hack your Exchange server, but as the world burns, this story, this Exchange server breach, just keeps taking new twists and turns every day. And we'll try to stay on it and try to explain it as best as we can understand it. All right, Forrest, let's talk about some other things, highlighting the amazing amount of data out there. Checkpoint did a quick report about 57% increase in ransomware attacks over the past 6 months. Again, nothing shocking there, but what's really shocking is the percent of organizations that have been affected. And what they're saying, Checkpoint is saying, in 2021, every month, the number of organizations being impacted is growing by 9%. Now, keep in mind, folks, that's interest compounding. So it's 9% in January, 9% the next month, 9% the month after that. It's not just 9% and it falls off. So the Maze and Rook, those malware variants, are the ones that have been most prevalent. Their research also indicates that the most affected countries are US, followed by Israel and India. And, a lot of these attacks are just exploiting the proxy logon vulnerability that's associated with the Exchange server breach. So
one note that I wanted to add on that was they were seeing a lot of instances where they were then, once they've breached the Exchange server, they then turn around and exploit Eternal Blue, which is now 4 years old. So again, going back to these ancient vulnerabilities are still being utilized for this stuff. So, please patch your gear.
All right, it's time for the mystery grab bag, odds and ends. I like this part of the show for us because we just pick random topics that are in the news that you might find interesting or valuable. Sometimes they have cyber relevance, sometimes they don't. Oftentimes we try to talk about things like privacy, and we try to talk about pen testing and cyber governance and all those other domains of cyber that rarely make the news. And in this case, the big story that came out is this billions of records. This story came out about billions of records have been hacked already, make cybersecurity or risk disaster. In other words, this story was like one of those fire and brimstone, schadenfreude, life is ending as we know it. But the numbers that got me, Forrest, was more data records have been compromised in 2020 alone than in the past 15 years combined.
Just the rate of acceleration is nutty. It's the breaches are getting bigger and bigger and bigger and more frequent. And we're getting to the point where it's not millions of records, it's billions of records. And we've got to bring out the Carl Sagan billions and billions.
Since the dawn of time. But yeah, dude, more data records compromised in 2020 than 15 years previously combined. Past 12 months, this story talks about 31 billion data records have been compromised. 31 billion, guys, that's insane. 171% jump from the previous year. When do we finally get our act together and say we need to put more focus on cybersecurity in this country? It's got to change, man. We can't keep on the same path like this.
Yeah. Again, going back to that, I fear that it takes something very shocking to get it to change. But maybe I'm just being too pessimistic, and we'll start to see some changes happening.
All right, folks, we have two final stories to talk about with you. We're going to move pretty quickly through these two stories. The one story that we always want to talk about VPN technology. I did a quick blog about it, and it'll be on our website. But the VPNs, are they secure, Forrest, is my question for you. Because I got to tell you, man, every day in the news, I feel like I see stories about VPNs being breached.
Yeah. It's you're moving your trust from one organization to another. It really depends on your threat model. There's a lot that goes into it for sure.
Now, up on the screen, we put a couple headlines from the past few months of all these different VPN providers that have been breached. And it goes further back than that. When you talk about the NordVPN breach that happened, and you talk about all these apps, these free VPN apps. Oh, they're free. They must be safe and secure, right? Nope. Well, all these all these VPN stories keep happening in the news, and we wanted to highlight the VPN risk report. This is a 2021 report. It came out from Cybersecurity Insiders. It was also co-produced with information from a vendor called Zscaler, a CASB vendor, cloud as a security broker vendor named Vscaler. And this report really helps reveal the current state of VPNs. And VPNs are not a new technology. I mean, this is 30 years old technology, but the report does a pretty good job of understanding the vulnerabilities with VPNs, the current risks, the current state of remote access in this country and in this world. The report had some pretty remarkable statistics for us. And the two stats that really caught my attention was 93% of companies are reporting that they are now leveraging VPN services in their environment. So these are companies that have not moved to perhaps a zero trust architecture, to a zero trust model. And 94% of those surveyed are indicating that they're aware of cyber criminals targeting their VPN. That seems to be the top story with this VPN report, but there's more to it.
Yeah, it's the biggest thing with the VPNs is, you know, it's got to fit your use case. You know, you're definitely going to be relying on your IT folk that are managing your VPN access, and of course, you know, if that's the case, then you're going to need to use their stuff to be able to do your remote work or whatever. Then there's also the personal use aspect of VPNs, where it's, you know, maybe your ISP is throttling you really bad, or you're trying to get around a geolocation block, or who knows, you know, there's any number of use cases for getting a VPN. But yeah, it's you've really got to do your due diligence and make sure that you're looking into who it is that you're ultimately going to be providing your data to, because realistically, you're just passing it through them rather than your ISP. So.
Right. We like to, from time to time, we like to talk about, you know, are they secure? What's the challenges in using a VPN? I will say that we did put together a blog article about this, how to pick the VPN in today's age with all of the vulnerabilities and all the breaches with VPNs and all these free apps that are out there offering free VPN. There's a lot of questions that you need to ask yourself, and trying to cover all of them in this short little blog is going to be, in this short little podcast, a little challenging. But I know there's two things for us that I really look for when I decide to buy a VPN. The most important thing in my mind is having a kill switch. That's the one thing I look for, Forrest. I have to know that there's a kill switch, that if I lose connection with my VPN, it automatically shuts off all internet connections.
Yeah, very, very important. I tend to go more the policy / governance route, because I think those are slightly more, potentially more legally actionable as far as claims go. So you know, making sure that if they're stating that they don't log something, that's explicitly stated somewhere. Knowing who owns the VPN, like what company owns, you know, this VPN service. Are they in any way related to ad networks?
Yep.
You know, there's a lot of research to do as far as you know, who it is that you're getting this service from.
The lack of standards for the VPN industry is really atrocious, and it's really hurting them from any sort of future growth. I know that in my life, I like to test out new standards for VPN technology. I tried Lightway, I tried some of the others out there, and they all have their strengths and they all have their weaknesses. See, you really have to understand if the VPN, and ask yourself, is the VPN securing your data as intended? And if you're not doing a location test and you're not checking those kind of things, then you're really going to be in a world of pain, as all of these VPN breaches keep making the news.
Yeah, definitely sticking with you know, some good reputable companies. I know Mozilla recently partnered with Movat, and they probably have some of the best policies that I've seen so far. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of that old adage, you know, nobody ever got fired for going with IBM. You know, going with a big name like Mozilla is probably not going to be strong.
Yeah. All right, and our last story for today, we got to talk about privacy and Google and Android. And this researcher, this guy out of the University of Dublin, he analyzed the traffic originating from iOS and Android devices, what he was able to find was Google is collecting 20 times more telemetry data from Android devices than Apple. And he was able to capture traffic that was heading to Apple and Google servers at different stages of a phone's operation. I wanted to hear your opinion and your thoughts on this, Forrest, because I know you're a big privacy guy. You're much more privacy oriented than what I am.
It's a never ending struggle. I feel like Sisyphus sometimes. I'm just constantly pushing this rock up a hill, and it's nutty because my last phone ended up dying. The battery was just completely shot. And it was like, well, I can try and replace it myself, and pretty much guarantee that I'll shatter the screen, or maybe it's time for a new device. So decided to get a new device, and I went with a Pixel 4a, just on the basis that it is supported by Graphene OS, which is a security hardened variant of the Android open source platform. So I could de-Google, and I could also additionally harden my phone. Two birds with one stone. Cool. Let's give it a shot. Apparently, this telemetry stuff that was exposed in this report happens even if you're not signed into a Google account. So, even to get Graphene OS installed on my phone, I still had to boot it up, get it into developer mode and all that. And it was still phoning home data, even though I wasn't using a Google account, and I was not doing any interaction with the operating system aside from turning on developer mode and rebooting. It's still down. So it's a never-ending tar pit of, they're always going to be siphoning something of some sort.
And Google said they challenged the results of the research. They said, you didn't see everything. You didn't do your data points aren't correct. But we do need to mention, and we'll put a graphic up here on the screen, that what is actually being sent to Apple and Google servers. And this researcher out of the University of Dublin says, when you first start up your phone following a factory reset, data is being sent. When a SIM card is inserted or removed, data is being sent. When a handset is just laying idle, data is being sent. When the settings screen is viewed, when location is enabled or disabled, or when the user logs in into the pre-installed app store. So, Forrest, this is the kind of stuff that, but what do you do about it? There's not much you can do about it. You got to have a phone, or you want a phone, and you need it to work right. You can't cripple the device. It's tough.
Do you go back to a candy bar flip phone that is just quote unquote dumb phone, or I guess they call them feature phones. I think that's the nomenclature nowadays. Or do you go off the deep end and try and do something like a Pine phone or the Librem, where it's a Linux-based OS from the ground up? I tried years back. I tried the Mozilla Flame, the Firefox OS phone.
That's a great phone.
It was it had a lot of potential, but man,
potential. Potential is the word.
It was painful, and apparently it's they've re-envisioned it, and it's rebranded as KaiOS now, and it's they use it for kind of low spec phones in that regard. So there's been some success, but the vast majority of the mobile market is this smartphone oriented, and it's all about the data mining. So you can try and flash a different OS on there, and that's going to significantly reduce the amount of information you get. But it's so prevalent. The surveillance panopticon is just out there.
So Forrest, before we wrap this up, there's two major concerns that came out of this guy's research, and he basically said, hey, the telemetry that's being used to link physical devices to personal details, it includes data that both companies are exploiting. So both Google and Apple are exploiting this data for advertising purposes, which is it's a sticky road to go down. Folks, like when you walk into a Target and you get that notification on your phone saying, hey, we noticed you walked into Target. We have a coupon for you. That's the kind of stuff that this researcher is talking about. The second question that comes up in this guy's research is the telemetry collection process, and how does that actually work and allow the makers of these devices to track the user's location based on your IP address. There's a lot of concerns there, and how does it then connect and upload that device telemetry data to the servers? So We don't have the answers, obviously, but it's important that we talk about this kind of stuff. And I'm hoping that this story, Forrest, will pick up more traction in the news and more people will be at least aware of it, what's going on.
Yeah, I hope that the mobile market especially starts to get a lot more scrutiny and maybe starting to look at some of those antitrust measures. I feel that we're in a similar position where we were with Microsoft back in the 90s. It feels like a lot of these companies are doing some very shady, very shifty things that are, in my mind, very anti-consumer behavior. And what do? You pick the lesser of two evils. I mean, come on, let's get some real consumer protection.
Well, folks, that's our show. We're so glad you joined us. We hope you had a good time. We try to talk about the fun stuff and sometimes the not so fun stuff. If you like us, please subscribe. We're part of SecurityMetrics, and we try to do the news every 2 weeks. And if you do subscribe and we hit 5,000 subscribers, I promise you I will whip out my Chris Farley impersonation for all of you. On behalf of the entire SecurityMetrics news team, I'm Heff.
Forrest.
And we hope you have a great week.